Bookseller Crow on the box. Tales from an empty bookshop.
Action.
Good evening and welcome to the latest in our series of Tales from an Empty Bookshop. Tonight I'd like to welcome Michael Wagg, who quite often comes along to our events and is normally that side in the audience, but tonight he's this side. Michael is actor, writer, and he's here to talk about The Turning Season, his book about East German football and the transition it went through when Germany was unified.
Yeah, believe it or not, I am. Yeah. I mean, it's the book is out this week, and it's my first book, so I'm really excited. And this is my first event as well, which I'm absolutely delighted that it's here. In my local bookshop, as you say, I come to a lot of events here and they're always brilliant, and I'm always that side. And of course, like many people, I've daydreamed, I wonder if one day I'll ever be up there, you know. And I can't quite believe that, to be honest. Again, I imagine like many people, but it's happened, and the book's out this week. It's called The Turning Season, Ddr-Oberliga Revisited, and it describes a journey that I've done, a physical journey, a real journey, between early 2019 and March of this year. The journey, I just about got it finished before, in fact, lockdown happened in Germany the day I left, basically. And a couple of weeks later, we were in the same situation here. So I just about got the journey done. But it was basically 3 trips I did over the course of that year, exploring the top flight, first division in East Germany during the days of the country, DDR. It was called the Ddr-Oberliga, and I decided, peculiarly, perhaps foolishly, to go back to the 14 cities or towns that had a top flight club in the first division in East Germany in the season 1989-90. And I wanted to visit them and write about each of the clubs and the cities within the 2019-20 football season, so exactly 30 years later. Something in my brain said I have to do this neatly, or I'm not going to do it at all. So it's 30 years on from that particular football season.
And there were 14 teams
There were 14 teams in the first division, yeah. And when that season started, that football season started in August of '89, the Berlin Wall was there, standing firm and dividing the city and the two Germanys. By the end of the season, in fact, soon into the season, the Mauer fall had happened and the wall had come down, and obviously parts of it physically still there, but essentially the wall was over, having stood there for 28 years. And so what that period of history in Germany is known as Die Wende, which means something like the turnaround or the turning point. So I started to see that football season as the turning season, and life for not just the football players and fans and staff of the clubs, but everyone in society at that time. Life had turned during that season, and I make no connection between that politically, but of course socially, because football clubs are so much part of the community.
I mean, there are certainly parts of it that, I mean, for instance, you talk about the size of the crowds that they used to get, which were astonishing, you know, in lots of respects. And then now, of course, you describe one that's down to 100 people,
or even less. Yeah. So a big part of that story is a lot of the 14. In fact, all of the 14 clubs are now playing at a lower level, and a lot of them are quite a significantly lower level, down to I think the sixth level. So amateur football with very small crowds, but that's sort of my bag as well. I don't bemoan personally the fact that I can't go and visit the big clubs, because I actually want to visit the smaller clubs. I'm interested in that, and I sort of feel like they can be probably easier for them to be really part of the community, those smaller clubs. So I could understand the places a bit more through them.
There's a certain point in it where, sort of about a third of the way through, where people start asking, or you imagine them asking you, "What are you doing there?"
Yeah.
I mean, what were you doing there?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's a very good question. I mean, one thing to say is the world of, particularly of East German football, and probably the world of East German society, was peculiar in many ways. And my choice as someone who knew nothing about football in that region before I started, and probably doesn't know a great deal now, more beyond what I saw and experienced, and also doesn't speak anywhere near good enough German for it to be actually practical.
Right.
There were lots of challenges that way. It was a peculiar decision for me to make, but I'm very, very glad I did, because of the lovely, lovely, kind, enthusiastic, quirky, peculiar people that I met along the way. And many of them said, "What on earth are you doing here? Why?" But once I told them I just wanted, what I was aiming to do was go to each place with an open mind, see what I saw, meet who I met, watch a match, drink a beer with some people at the match, and ask them about their football club now and its place in the community, and if they were old enough or if they had experience through family members or whatever, to think back to 30 years and what might have changed, but not in a broad historical, socio-political context at all. Just people in their lives and the things they do. And one of the things they do is go to the local football ground, I guess. So it was very simple, my aim, and I didn't go thinking I want to write about this here, and I need to interview that person and talk about this event or match or whatever. I went with an empty notebook really, and said, I find what I find, and I hope I find a little story to tell. Honestly, looking for a positive story to tell of each place.
When the league was in its pomp, though, the players were not professional, were they?
No, not at all. Officially, the clubs on the whole were connected to a particular industry or a particular company. So Lokomotive Leipzig was the railway workers team. Wismut Aue was the Wismut mine, it was a Soviet mine, so a miners team. There was a chemical workers team, Chemie, the police team, the regular police and the secret police was Dynamo, or the Dynamo sports club. So the teams are all connected to an industry, to
right.
Work, and players are officially paid through their job because they work for the railway company or whatever. In reality, I believe that on the whole they didn't do that. They were operating pretty much as professionals at the top clubs.
Yeah. Well, there's the example of one team, I can't remember their name, being relegated to 2 leagues because they were paying their players.
Yeah, they were found to be paying their players.
Yeah. Anti-socialist.
Yeah.
I was also slightly disappointed in the even in that level of football where you've got 100 people watching it, there was the shadow of a billionaire across it. that they couldn't even escape the presence of that amount of money, sort of being not necessarily associated with the club, but with the town and the fortunes of the steel industry.
Yeah, in Eisenhüttenstadt, that's since reunification and the privatisation of a lot of the industry in that town. It was a massive steelworks, and it still is. There still is a large steelworks there, but it's now private and owned by one of the richest people in the world, and
only employing 2,000 people as opposed to the many thousands that the town was built around.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a new town, really, a Soviet new town, called Stalinstadt at one stage.
Do you want to read us a bit?
Yeah, love to. I thought, I don't know whether you've got any thoughts yourself, John, but the start of the Leipzig chapter, which I've called 1966 and all that, which I've nicked from somewhere. I can't quite remember where I've nicked that title from, but I have anyway. And I'll just read the first page or so of that, which is about the railway workers team, Lokomotive Leipzig. A German side lines up in the tunnel, about to step out into an iconic stadium to play one of the biggest matches of its lives. It is 1966. Among the opposition, standing beside them, is the goal threat who wears number 10. He has high hopes pinned to him, and a famous hat-trick's not out of the question. He's wearing a plain red shirt today with white shorts and red socks, while the German team is naturally sporting its iconic strip in yellow and blue. Hold on. Shouldn't that be white and black? Black shorts, white shirts with black trim and a badge with an eagle on it. Isn't their captain the Kaiser and the opposition number 10 Jeff Hurst? Surely the people will think it's all over. It isn't. It's a freezing Wednesday night in December. Snow shovelled to the edges of the pitch for a third round clash in the Intercities Fairs Cup. This is not the World Cup final or Wembley Stadium in June, nor is it the team of West Germany led by Franz Beckenbauer. At the Zentralstadion in Leipzig, the yellow and blue strip, albeit with a rare red trim, belongs to the railway workers team from Saxony. This is 1966 and all that, but it is the year of Lokomotive Leipzig. If the archive footage is anything to go by, the stadium is full with nearing 80,000 fans. But the floodlighting appears dim and it's hard to see them. The players appear shadowy figures, skating in the reflection of the Saxon snow. The stadium lights are just about bright enough to pick out the opposition number 10 though, confirming it's definitely not Jeff Hurst. The opponents in red tonight are Benfica from Lisbon, one of the great sides of the day led by one of its greatest players, while the captain of Lokomotive Leipzig, just a few steps ahead of him in the tunnel, is a slight, short, balding man with a comb-over called Karl Drossler. As we were waiting in the tunnel leading out to the pitch at the Zentralstadion, we came together, Drossler tells me. As I recall it, I said to the boys as the team captain, "Today, it's our weather."
He was a fascinating character.
Drossler.
Yeah.
I met Karl Drossler. He's, I think he's just turned, 82 maybe. It was the day after his birthday or something. He's a remarkable man. He was the captain of Lokomotive Leipzig in the 60s. Later he was the chairman of the club post-reunification in the 90s. Meanwhile he'd trained, he was a scientist, that was his trade, became a professor at Leipzig University, is a leading light in something that I don't understand, but he's an eminent professor of physics, I think, and still cycles to the match in his 80s and still very connected to the football club. So he's done everything there, and a lot of the chapter it contains the chat that I had with him, which I was very lucky to do, I think.
I was particularly I'll do that again. I was particularly taken with the story of the scoreboard here as well, which I don't know if you can see it there. We can perhaps cut in a picture of
Sure.
because it looks like it's an electronic scoreboard, but it's not, is it?
No. Well, is it? This one, I don't want to spoil too much, but the story, this is at Stahl Brandenburg, which, so that's the steelworkers team historically.
Right.
And I visited there with a good friend of mine from Hamburg, who helped me quite a lot with translation across the trip, and was with me alongside with me for much of it. And we went to a match at Stahl Brandenburg against Chemie Premnitz. I'd have to check. I think it was at the 6th level of German football, unified German football now, and we were admiring this scoreboard. And a chap came up and said, we were taking photos, so you can get a bit closer. So he opened the gates and we went around the running track to get closer to. We were showing interest in this, taking the pictures, and then an older man came along and said, "Come with me," and showed us up. You could just about see the steps at the back of the scoreboard, and up the steps we went and into this, what I described as a magic box, and in there we discovered his brilliant, magical, I think beautiful fix for an ageing electronic scoreboard.
Absolutely. So, when did you first go to Germany?
Nearly 20 years ago. As you say, I'm an actor as well as a writer, and I've done predominantly touring theatre. I've been on the road a lot, less so now. So in early days, early 2000s, I did quite a lot of touring with a company who were based in Munich. We toured all over Europe. Grueling and hard, but brilliant experience. Back of the van, one-nighters, different town, different theatre every night. And because the company is based in Germany, a lot of it was in Germany, so we saw all sorts of random places that I would never have been to. And I remember, in fact, it was the first tour, and I think it was 2003. There was a big portion of it in Eastern Germany, and I have no idea why. And I say in the book that I can't quite pinpoint why. I just got really fascinated, and it started there, and it never left me. With the eastern part of Germany, it's grand, but it's faded and shabby in parts. Some of it's very beautiful. The rebuilt Dresden, brilliant cities like Berlin and Leipzig, but also and the coast as well, the north coast. But it was that first trip that I got very fascinated with the eastern part, and 10 years later, I started to get more and more interested and passionate about lower league football, non-league football in this country. So at some point in the last couple of years, I sort of brought the two together. But if I'm honest, I wanted to go back and tour Eastern Germany without having to do the show every night, because it really gets in the way.
But you weren't in the back of a van.
No, I was on the cheapest coach I could find, but buses and staying as cheaply as I could in Airbnbs and so on. But the fact that I didn't have to do the theatre work meant that I was free to just immerse myself in looking around like a tourist, just like a tourist does, but also seeing as much football as I could. And so I did a lot of wandering. I just walked around all day looking, where might the little story be, that not the story that had to be told, but that tweaks my imagination a little bit, and thought, okay, write about me.
But you must have had to have timed it pretty well to fix it in with the matches that were going on. I guess.
Absolutely, and finance as well.
Yeah.
Where I could get cheap accommodation, where the travel was cheap enough, flights, match fixtures. Trying to do it I had a vague idea what order I wanted to do it in, but it just didn't work that way. And a lot of it was to do with match fixtures. But I quite enjoyed that. I did January of last year. I spent pretty much the whole month sat at the desk planning it with charts and maps and trying to find the cheapest way, because I just didn't have any money to do it. I shouldn't have been doing it really. But I really enjoyed that planning. Trying to make it all work so that I could get to all 14 places, and I could see a match at all 14 places, and I could spend enough time. I spent 2 or 3 days in each place, which is what I could afford to do.
There's also a strand in it which, for want of a better description, I think is to do with art, with kind of hang on. What? There's also a little thread in the book of, for want of a better word, art of performance art, which is character Massimo Furlan.
Yeah, in a way, I sort of start with him, and in doing the research, before I did the trips, I stumbled across his work. He's a Swiss-born Italian artist, performance artist. His current work, I think, is some sort of Eurovision Song Contest of philosophers. That's what he's working on at the moment. But one thing he does periodically, and he's done various versions of it, is a reenactment of football matches. They're called foot, and he'll go to a city and he'll do some research, and he'll decide. He'll pick one particular famous football match that's happened there. He'll decide one player that he's going to represent. He's going to play, and he recreates the whole 90 minutes exactly as it happens, but with just him on the pitch, no ball, no referee, no substitutes, no managers and coaches, but there is a crowd, a live crowd, who are listening to the radio commentary of the original football match, while he goes through the exact movements, every gesture, every cry, every curse, every dash, every foul of one particular player. But then he upped the ante a little bit and decided to include two players. So the version I talk about, there are two players. There is Jürgen Sparwasser, who scored the only goal in the only World Cup match between East Germany and West Germany in the World Cup in 1974 in West Germany. Sparwasser scored the goal, and the goalkeeper that he scored it past Sepp Maier. So he recreates that match in its entirety with no ball. Which I was just drawn to. I like the silliness of it. I like the sort of the heavily laden nostalgia romance of it. I like the idea that the crowd are very active. They're playing the role of the original crowd. I haven't seen this event live. I've seen only clips of it, but I have spoken at length to Massimo. He's a lovely man, and I've offered myself, if he ever does it again, to play Jürgen Sparwasser. Now, whether I could do that, we're talking about 90 minutes of running around, chasing after an invisible ball, but also to the exact specifications of the original movement. But it's wonderful, and it, in my mind, I wanted it to be the starting point, because in going back to this country that doesn't exist anymore, and to football clubs that do exist but previous versions of them don't, I had in my mind that I was looking for the ghosts of, and in one sense the ghosts of the football club and the players and the fans that used to watch them, but in another sense the spirit of the clubs now. So I'm sort of drawn, and I don't apologise for my view of it is quite romantic, I think, and there's a nostalgic element to it. I don't apologise for that, and I'm romantically drawn to crumbling football grounds and the history and the ghosts of previous games. So Massimo felt like a good starting point, and he makes me laugh as well. And I hope there's other light-hearted stuff in the book as well.
How do the teams fare these days in comparison to what they were in a way? I mean, now that it's all just the German league, I mean, are they? There aren't many of them.
No,
in the top league.
In the top league, the Bundesliga, which is the unified German league, there's one team that I don't cover in this book because they were a second division team in 1989. It's Union Berlin. They're in the top flight. For long periods, there were in fact, before Union Berlin got into the top flight a couple of years ago, there was a 10-year period where there was no former Eastern clubs in the top division. There was a long period where there's only one. There's only ever been two at the same time, I think. And of the 14 clubs that I visited, Erzgebirge Aue, which is a club from a pretty small town in the south of what was East Germany, a really small mining town. But they've punched far above their weight. They did in DDR times, and they have done since. They're in the second division, the second Bundesliga, and they're the highest placed of these 14 clubs at the moment. Right. And then they're spread between the second and the sixth level of football. So they're all playing at a lower level. And Union are the only one in the top.
Do the supporters kind of resent that in any way?
I think it's complicated, and in football terms, it started right in the year after this year I'm looking at, which is the following season happened in East German football while reunification was happening. That process was well underway, And in football terms, the Oberliga, which was the East German league, were given 2 places in the reunified Bundesliga, which was was disproportionate to the size of the 2 countries. East Germany was roughly a quarter of the size of West Germany, and the league, I think, had 20 teams in the reunified Bundesliga. So there are only 2 from the start. There's never been more than 2. So it started there, and they've struggled to keep up. But it's really complicated because it's part of the whole the way that the East has had to try and keep up post reunification is complicated, and I'm not trying to analyse that. I'm not the brain for that. I respect the fact that it's very complicated, and it's hard for those clubs, and it has been for 30 years, and a lot of them are still struggling to survive, like smaller non-league and lower league clubs are in all countries, and particularly now, obviously, with the pandemic. But it's been really hard, and they're still catching up, I think.
Do you want to read another bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. I thought I'd read just a tiny, again, opening of a chapter. I mean, the book really is, I hope that it is varied, and I hope that each chapter, I went with sort of, again, with the open mind, in the sense of I wanted stories to present themselves to me, and then I wanted to choose a form for each, how I was going to write up each experience. Again, based on what was presented to me. So some of it is, for example, the Berlin chapter, it's a piece of fiction, imagining various characters walking the streets of Berlin. It's fiction inspired by my wandering aimlessly around Berlin and imagining people walking to football matches in different directions, particularly east to west. Other chapters, one chapter, the Chemnitz, Karl Marxstadt chapter, Chemnitz, the city of Chemnitz used to be called Karl Marxstadt, includes, it has some sort of travelogue stuff, experience of meeting a particular fan there, a lovely bloke there, but also it's interspersed with what I've attempted, a light-hearted poor version of a Cold War spy thriller, which ends with a very, very romantic gesture. So I've given myself huge challenges within each, but I wanted to attempt that in that particular chapter. And then others are a bit more straight, sort of travelogue-y, and with snippets, quite a lot of snippets of history. So I really wanted each chapter to be quite different. And the Bischofswerda chapter is a bit different, I think. And I think it'd be nice to read just a page or 2 of this, because football it's really not about football, and much of that chapter isn't about football. And quite a bit of the book also isn't about football. It's about the communities and about the places that I visited. But I'll read a little bit of the myth of Bischofswerda. Do you know anybody from Bischofswerda? Have you ever been to Bischofswerda? Do you know anybody who has ever been to Bischofswerda? Or is its existence merely propagated by an entity known only as Sie, they in German, always in block capitals, which has conspired with the authorities to create the illusion of the city's existence? The above is in fact the Bielefeld conspiracy, the likelihood that most people answer no to each of the 3 questions, thus confirming the non-existence of the city. It was first suggested in 1994 on Usenet, a precursor to internet forums. It is used in the city's marketing and was referred to by Angela Merkel in 2012 when she said she had been to a town hall meeting in Bielefeld, adding, if it exists at all. The Chancellor of Germany went on to wonder, I had the impression that I was there. As my journey went on, I was starting to have a strong suspicion that the same was the case with Bischofswerda, that it might be the eastern equivalent of this mythical place from North Rhine-Westphalia. Whenever I told football followers from home or in Germany of the 14 places I was heading to on my bummel through the Oberliga, it was only when I got to Bischofswerda that they glazed over stared ahead quizzically for a moment, then turned to me and asked one of two questions. Where? Or, more often, to be fair, why? I started to think of the place as Bischofswhere. Bischofswerda had become for me not only a potential conspiracy, an invented place once entered, never returned from, but an existential crisis. Bischofswerda as the Albert Camus of lower league football. I even started to consider I'd been chosen, admittedly by myself, to establish and promulgate the myth of Bischofswerda, an equivalent conspiracy from the East that, just like Bielefeld, Bischofswerda doesn't actually exist. So I set out bravely to prove it one way or the other. Not an easy task when considering that even proving that the place does exist would merely further the position that anybody claiming knowledge about Bielefeld or Bischofswerda is promptly disregarded as being in on the conspiracy or having been themselves deceived. Not being in on it, I was surely setting myself up for a deception, or at best a profound lack of understanding, which was fast becoming a theme on this bummel of mine. But Bischofswerda does exist, doesn't it?
Excellent. Shall we have a round of applause?
Yeah.
They can find you a book for your girlfriend, your husband, your girl or your boy. And if you've got a need for an uplifting read, Justine and Jonathan can pick out a book you'll enjoy. What a book at the Bookseller Crow on the hill. What a book at the Bookseller Crow on the hill. Crystal Palace Hill, it is. But you can order online.